I stood beneath a wash of slate sky as they lowered her into the earth at Greenwood Cemetery. The rain had worked its way down the collar of my coat and traced cold rivers down my neck. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments which country you're watching from. Let's see. My name is Harold Benedict. I am 68 years old, and today I watched them close a cedar box that held half a century of quiet afternoons and kitchen light. The chapel had been nearly empty. Only me, a young minister who had never met Eleanor, and echoes that seemed to belong to another house. Force of habit, I drew my phone from my inside pocket. No missed calls, no messages. I scrolled to the feed. There was Miranda, 40, posing before a lit tree in a boutique mountain lodge. A designer parka, a flute of champagne caught mid-toast. The photo was posted that morning. The caption made a joke about self-care and sparkle. I swiped. There was Marcus, 44, in a charcoal suit at a ribbon cutting for a new development on the other side of the country. That smile I used to think of as mine was perfectly arranged for the camera. Posted earlier that day. They had picked glossy moments and networking photo ops over the slow, private work of saying goodbye. I walked back to the car after the service while the world went on being ordinary: traffic lights, people with umbrellas, a dog shaking off rain. I thought of small things. How Eleanor used to set the teapot on the stove at 9:30. How she kept the stack of recipe cards held together with a rusted paper clip. How she would hum off-key and drop a button sometimes as she bent over a puzzle. These were the private, unshareable details that never made it to any feed. The feeling that squeezed my chest was something between grief and the cold realization that the life I had been holding might be slipping away in ways I had not understood. That night I did not sleep. The house was too loud with its own empty noises. I sat at the table until 4 in the morning, staring at the grooves in the wood where 100 birthdays had left their marks. At 9 the next morning, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, there they stood, Marcus and Miranda. Not in black. Marcus wore an expensive suit, the sort of jacket you wear to close deals, not to kneel by a casket. Miranda had on cream-colored athleisure, hair pulled into a high ponytail, looking as if she had come straight from studio class. They carried paper cups and a bag filled with something from Chain Bakery. "Morning, Dad," Marcus said, moving past me with the casual confidence of a man who expects the world to open for him. The scent of his cologne filled the hallway. "Too much of it," Miranda said, easing a double cup toward my usual spot at the table with a small smile that felt rehearsed. That little act, placing a large hot drink where my elbow always was, landed in my stomach like a stone. It was the kind of small, calculated kindness that said more about an image than about grief. That little act, placing a large hot drink where my elbow always was, landed in my stomach like a stone. It was the kind of small, calculated kindness that said more about an image than about grief. They sat as if they were hosts offering solace, as if the script had been rehearsed. But the eyes that met mine were not the eyes of the little ones who once clung to my shirt for the taste of Christmas cake. They were the eyes of people who had learned to look at the world through a screen and an invoice. I let the silence settle like dust. Then Marcus cleared his throat and said, "About yesterday. About the funeral. Look, Dad, we're sorry." I looked at him and said nothing. His mouth moved, but the explanation already tasted like a professional rehearsal. He spoke of closings and timelines, of a project that could not be missed, of 3 years of work and $45 million on the line. Miranda added, without looking up from her phone at first, that she had a contractual obligation with a major wellness sponsor and simply could not cancel the retreat. Their words were precise, rational phrases meant to smooth edges and absolve them, a language designed to make guilt sound like logistics. In that moment, that ordinary morning bright with steamed milk and stale bagels, I felt my life tilt. Whatever else they were, they had chosen the calendar of the market and the images of their feeds over the slow, messy ritual of goodbye. Their polished remorse smelled faintly of strategy. I remember thinking then, very clearly, this is my house. This is where she taught them to knead dough with flour on their small, impatient fists. This house has the marks of their growth on the banister. It was not an asset on a spreadsheet. Not yet. Then Marcus slid a folder across the table and opened it as if he'd been waiting to do so. "What is this?" I asked. He said, with a bland economy of tone, that because Eleanor had died without a will, the estate would be divided according to law, and that, while I would receive my preferential share, the remainder would be divided between them. He tapped a listing clipped to the inside of the folder, a bright, glossy printout of one-bedroom condominiums in a neighborhood he called convenient, affordable, and perfect for a man my age. "You don't need this big house," he said. "You should simplify. Downsize. We've already spoken to a realtor. She can list it next week." I felt something inside me harden, not out of greed, but because of life. Every bath, every patched roof tile, every birthday candle blown by chubby mouths had been reduced to a price and a plan on white paper. They spoke in numbers and practicality and kept their faces carefully neutral. "Dad," Miranda said, reaching for my hand with manicured fingers, "we just want what's best for you." I pulled my hand back. That small refusal shocked them. I stood up, everyone my 68 years making my knees ache. "You need to leave," I told them. The words came out like a line from a fire call I had once made, simple and clear. They did not leave without a fight. Marcus hissed that I should not be stubborn, that legal rights existed, and that I was not thinking clearly. Miranda's voice quivered with a practiced mix of exasperation and faux compassion. "We're only trying to help," she said. Their charm felt like a coat of varnish over something brittle. When they left, I closed the door and pressed my back against it. The house breathed around me, full of the ordinary things that had kept Eleanor alive here. The small ceramic mug she used every morning, the quilt she'd stitched with squares of old shirts, the chipped saucer she saved for biscotti. I thought of the box of keys in a bowl by the phone, of how she would whistle when making tea, and then I remembered something else, a small key she had pressed into my palm in the hospital 2 weeks before she died. "Go to the bank," she had whispered. "Box 339. Don't tell anyone. Promise me." I had not understood then why she had been so secretive. Now I understood perfectly. I drove to the bank that afternoon, the small key in my pocket feeling heavier with every mile. But before I reached the parking lot, before I even turned off the engine, a flood of memories rose up so sharply I had to sit still and let them pass through me. People talk about grief as if it were one clean thing. It isn't. It's 1,000 quiet moments stacked on top of one another. Moments you expect to be ordinary until the person who shared them with you is no longer there to complete them. It breaks you in strange, sideways ways. Eleanor and I met when she was 22 and I was 24. Just two young people trying to figure out how to make groceries stretch and which bus routes ran the latest. She had a laugh that arrived before she did, airy and warm. She'd laugh first and then ask what was funny. Over time, that laugh softened into a smile she could carry in her eyes. We moved into our house when Miranda was barely walking and Marcus still needed help tying his shoes. The yard was overgrown then, a wild patch of stubborn weeds and dandelions. Eleanor loved it instantly. She said it reminded her that even neglected things could bloom again with patience. She always believed that about people, too. She kept the kitchen as her anchor space, the place where she worked out worries by kneading bread or testing new recipes. If she wanted to have a serious talk, she would hand me a knife and tell me to chop carrots. I used to joke that we were never more honest than when we were elbow deep in stew. It was in that kitchen where she told me she was expecting Miranda. It was the same kitchen where she stood barefoot, humming to herself while frosting a cake for Marcus's 9th birthday, smearing icing on her cheek without noticing. And later, decades later, it was the kitchen where she leaned against the island, breathless, her chest tight, and told me something felt wrong inside her. The heart condition came quietly and stayed like a tenant who refused to move on. 9 long months. 9 months of hospital visits, specialists, tests, and a carousel of medication adjustments that always seemed to promise but never deliver comfort. I watched her strength shrink in increments, a long walk shortened, a staircase climbed once instead of twice, needle pricks on fragile skin. I was there every day, not because I was noble or strong, but because she had been there for me long before illness ever arrived. That is the quiet truth about marriages that survive decades. You don't keep score. You just keep showing up. Marcus and Miranda would call sometimes. They'd send flowers, always enormous, elaborate arrangements that smelled more of performance than concern. I kept hoping they would show up for her the way she had shown up for them their whole lives. I kept imagining the door opening and seeing them standing there, not because it was convenient, not because they were afraid of how it might look online, but because it was their mother. But the calls were rushed and surface deep. "How is she doing, Dad?" they'd ask, and before I finished the first sentence, I'd hear the clicking of their keyboards or the hum of background conversations. They visited twice each in 9 months. Each visit lasted less than an hour. They arrived with expensive candles or herbal teas she was too weak to enjoy. They left early for flights or meetings or urgent commitments. When they hugged her goodbye, their arms were polite and brief. Eleanor never complained. She would smile tiredly after they left and say, "They're busy, love. Life is fast for them." But later, when the morphine dulled her thoughts, she would talk to me in quiet fragments, worries she didn't want to burden them with. "I don't know if they know how to sit still anymore," she whispered once as I brushed her hair. "I don't know if they know how to come back to the soft places." The night she handed me the little key, she was trembling. We were alone in her hospital room, machines humming in faint rhythms behind her. She lifted her hand slowly, like lifting way down wings, and pressed the key into my palm. "When I'm gone, Harold," she whispered, "go to the bank. Box 339. Promise me you won't tell them." "Not yet." Her eyes glistened with something deeper than pain, something like fear or regret. I didn't understand then. I only thought she wanted me to handle her small private papers, maybe letters, maybe a few mementos she didn't want the kids to throw out. I kissed her forehead and said, "I promise." She squeezed my fingers. Her hand was so light it felt like holding paper. "I love you," she said. "Don't let them turn you into a ghost." I didn't know what she meant. I thought grief was the ghost she feared for me, that I would dissolve inside the quiet. But then came the funeral. Then came the morning with Marcus's cologne and Miranda's precisely chosen sympathy. Then came the folder they had prepared, the confident ease with which they said the house no longer suited a man my age, as though decades of laughter and work and breath were things that could be folded into a contract. That key, the one she pressed into my hand, had been a small mystery for 2 weeks. But now it glowed in my mind like a lighthouse. Eleanor had known. She had seen something coming long before I did, and she had prepared. The next morning, I drove to the bank, the same one where Eleanor and I had opened our first joint account 42 years earlier, back when the teller still knew our names and the pens were chained to the counter. The building had changed. Sleek glass walls now stood where once there had been sandstone. But inside, the air smelled the same, faint paper dust and the ghost of old ink. I told the clerk I needed access to safety deposit box number 339. She checked my ID, nodded, and led me through a quiet corridor that smelled of wax and cold metal. She unlocked a small compartment, placed it on a table, and left me alone. Inside was a single envelope, thick with folded papers and a small flash drive wrapped in tissue. The envelope had my name written on it, Harold, in Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting. I sat down and opened it. The first page was a letter. "My love, if you are reading this, it means I've gone where I can't keep you company anymore. You always said you'd handle the practical side when I went, but I couldn't bear to leave you with only practical things. So I did a bit of my own preparing. You mustn't be angry. I just wanted to keep something safe, something for you, and maybe something for them, too, though I don't know if they'll understand right away. When Marcus and Miranda were small, I made a habit of setting aside a little each month. Not much at first, just enough for a few extra loaves of bread. Then over time, I learned, invested, save again. I never told you because I wanted it to grow quietly, like patience. It's all in here. Account numbers, statements, passwords, instructions. The total is more than either of us ever expected. Please don't let it go where it won't heal anything. You'll know what to do. One more thing. If they ever make you feel like you don't belong in your own home, remember this. You built that house with your hands and your years. You paid for every beam with laughter and sacrifice. Don't let them turn love into math. That place is yours until you decide otherwise. On my heart, always, Eleanor. I sat there for a long while, the letter trembling between my fingers. She had always been the quiet one with numbers. She called them her rainy day puzzles. I never asked where the money went. I assumed it was for small surprises, gifts, donations, maybe family things. But what she described wasn't a modest nest egg. It was a fortune carefully hidden under the soft language of patience. I unwrapped the flash drive, plugged it into the bank's small courtesy computer, and opened the file. It contained neatly labeled folders: savings, a holdings, medical fund, Marcus and her tuition, Miranda and her wedding, and finally, one marked legacy. Inside that folder was a document titled Instruction. I opened it. In case of my death, all funds in the following accounts shall transfer to Harold Benedict exclusively. Should he choose, after 1 year, to distribute any part of it, he may do so at his discretion. Until then, no other party is to be informed or involved. The accounts she listed totaled more than I could have ever imagined. 7 digits and a comma. I wasn't sure I trusted at first glance. She had hidden away a life's worth of small economies and turned them into something immense. When I walked out of the bank, the sun was sharp and blinding. I felt both rich and broken. I didn't want the money. I wanted her. But part of me also felt this strange flicker of justice. The knowledge that the house, the one they wanted to list like a used car, was safe for now. That night, I sat by the window and watched the streetlights burn yellow halos through the rain. I opened Marcus's social media profile. There he was, photographed against polished marble, shaking hands with a senator, captioned with words about legacy, opportunity, and growth. Comments poured in: congratulations, admiration, envy. He had built an empire of presentation. Then I looked up Miranda's page. Her profile was a collage of serenity, sunlight, yoga mats, minimalist kitchens, sponsored retreats. Her followers called her an inspiration, the embodiment of balance. I saw not one mention of her mother's passing. Not a candle emoji, not a memory. Just bright poses and affirmations about letting go of things that drain your energy. I scrolled through my messages. There was one from Miranda, 3 lines long. Hope you're okay, Dad. Remember to hydrate. Thinking of you. No punctuation, no emotion. Just tone-polished emptiness. Marcus's message had been purely administrative, a list of what he called next steps. I realized something that chilled me. To them, I wasn't a father anymore. I was a piece of estate logistics, a person-shaped signature, a pending transfer of ownership. 4 days after, I didn't respond. I cooked small meals, ate half of them, and left the rest for the quiet. I walked through the house as if it were breathing, touching the walls, the worn stair rail, the garden spade Eleanor had refused to throw out even when the handle splintered. It was all more alive than my children's words. On the 4th night, I made a decision. I would follow her instructions. I would keep the money secret. I would wait 1 year, exactly 1 year, before deciding what to do. Maybe time would teach them something. Maybe not. But I also started keeping a record, small, quiet observations in a notebook. Every interaction, every text, every call. I didn't know why then, but part of me felt I was collecting proof. Not for revenge, for clarity. And as the weeks passed, something strange began to happen. Neighbors who had known us for decades started telling me small stories about Eleanor. Gestures of kindness she had done quietly. Paying someone's overdue rent, covering the cost of a scholarship at the local library, buying groceries for a single mother across town. None of them had known where the money came from. Now I did. Every good thing she had done without applause. And every good thing our children could have done, they had replaced with performance. I began to understand what she had left me wasn't just a fortune. It was a map, one that pointed toward what had gone wrong with the people we raised. 3 months passed. The snow came early that year, soft and relentless. The house creaked under the cold, as if mourning with me. I spent most days reading in Eleanor's chair, a faded patchwork recliner by the window. It still held the faint scent of lavender and old books. Marcus called on the 2nd week of January. His voice was bright, forced, the way salesmen sound when they're about to ask for something. "Dad, just checking in," he began, and I could hear the clink of glass and laughter in the background. A restaurant. not his office. "How's everything going?" "Quiet," I said. "That's good. Listen, we've been talking, Miranda and I, and we think it's time we revisit the house thing. The market's still hot, and you could get great price. You could buy something manageable and dash." "I'm not selling," I interrupted. A pause, then a sigh that sounded like he'd expected resistance, but hoped charm might fix it. "Dad, you can't just sit there alone in that big place. It's not healthy." I could almost hear the polite smile forming on his face. "I'm not alone," I said quietly. "Your mother's here." He chuckled softly, as though indulging a senile joke. "Dad, I know it's been hard, but you've got to move forward. Mom wouldn't want you to dwell." "No, Marcus," I said. "She wouldn't want me to give up what we built." He didn't answer for a moment. Then his tone changed, flatter, sharper. "You know, legally, we could force a sale. I'm trying to avoid that. But Miranda's been talking to a lawyer, Dash." That was when something inside me clicked, the way an old hinge locks in place. "Do what you think is right," I said, "but remember, your mother thought of everything before you did." And I hung up. The next day, Miranda arrived unannounced. Her car gleamed in the driveway. The latest model, sleek and black. She came in with that soft, performative calm she wore online, the kind that photographs well. She looked around as if seeing the house for the first time. "You've really let it go, Dad," she said, brushing a hand across the mantel. "Mom would have wanted you to keep things tidy." "Mom," I said, "would have wanted you to show up when she was still breathing." Her eyes flicked toward me, a sharp flash of guilt disguised as irritation. "That's not fair," she said quickly. "You know how my schedule is, Dash." "Yes," I said. "Your schedule has always been sacred." She sighed dramatically, setting her handbag on the table. "I didn't come here to argue. I came to talk. Marcus, and I think you're not making rational decisions. You're still grieving. Maybe you're not thinking clearly about what's best for everyone." Everyone. That word caught in my chest. "What's best for everyone," I repeated slowly. "Or what's best for you too." She started pacing, her tone switching between persuasion and patience. "Dad, this place is too big. You could move somewhere quiet, near the lake, maybe a small apartment. We'd handle everything. You'd have company, community, Dash." "I already have both," I said. "And I have no plans to move." Her smile faltered. "You're being impossible. You can't hold on to everything forever." I stood, steadying myself on the edge of the table. "I don't plan to hold on to everything. Just what matters." She rolled her eyes and muttered something about pride. Then, softer as if rehearsed, "You know, Mom would have wanted us to take care of things properly." That sentence stopped me cold. I walked to the cabinet and opened a drawer, pulling out the letter Eleanor had written. I didn't hand it to her. I just looked at her and said, "Do you really want to talk about what your mother wanted?" She hesitated, a flicker of unease breaking through the smooth facade. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked. "It means," I said slowly, "that she left more behind than you realize. And not one word of it mentioned selling this house." Her eyes narrowed. "You're hiding something," she said. "Maybe I am," I replied. "Or maybe I'm protecting something." She stepped closer, voice sharp now. "Dad, if there's something about the estate we should know, you're legally obligated to Dash." I couldn't help but laugh, though it came out more like a cough. "Legally obligated? Is that what this is now? A transaction?" She flinched, but didn't back down. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said. "I'm being your father." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then she grabbed her bag, muttered something about calling Marcus, and left. The door slammed harder than she intended. I sat down again, trembling, not from anger, but from the realization that Eleanor had seen this coming. She had known how far they would go. 2 weeks later, a formal letter arrived. Marcus's firm. Legal stationery, full of language that sounded polite but meant war. A petition for property evaluation and division of estate assets. They were serious. I read it 3 times, then placed it beside Eleanor's letter. 2 worlds on the same table. One built on love, one built on entitlement. I didn't hire a lawyer. Not yet. Instead, I went to the library, to the same corner where Eleanor used to read cookbooks. I spent 2 days researching inheritance law, property rights, and transfer clauses. I found what I needed, a small clause in the Estate Act that protected a surviving spouse's primary residence from forced liquidation without voluntary consent. Eleanor's foresight had been perfect. The house was mine, legally untouchable. The next morning, I sent Marcus a short message. Do what you need to do, son. The house isn't for sale. Your mother made sure of that. He didn't reply. But that evening, I saw a new post on his profile, a photo of him standing beside a skyline, captioned, "Some bridges must burn so others can be built." Thousands of likes. I stared at it until my eyes burned. That night, I took Eleanor's letter out again and read it for what must have been the 100th time. One sentence stood out. Don't let them turn love into math. I whispered it aloud. Don't let them turn love into math. Then I made a decision. If they wanted to see the value of what they had lost, I would show them, but not with anger, not with lawyers, with something stronger, something she would have approved of. The plan began to take shape in the quiet of that long winter night. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The sky outside was gray, the kind of gray that feels heavy with its own thoughts. The house was colder than usual, or maybe I simply felt it more. I sat at the kitchen table with a pot of black coffee and Eleanor's letter folded neatly beside my mug. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel angry, just still. People think revenge comes with fire and shouting. It doesn't. Real revenge, the kind that teaches, not destroys, arrives quietly. Like morning frost, I took out my notebook and began to write. Not to Marcus or Miranda, but to someone else, a lawyer Eleanor and I had trusted years ago, a soft-spoken man named Harold Finch. He'd handled our wills, and he'd been at her funeral, sitting in the back pew without saying a word. I wrote him a simple letter explaining that I wanted to amend my will. Not out of spite, but for truth. I ended it with one sentence. I want them to understand the weight of what they try to sell. I sealed the envelope, addressed it, and set it by the front door. Then I poured another cup of coffee and looked around the kitchen. Every corner told a story. The dent in the cabinet where Marcus had once crashed his toy plane, the faded floral wallpaper Eleanor had refused to replace because it still smells like the first spring we moved in. That afternoon, I called Harold. He remembered my voice instantly. "Thomas," he said, his tone gentle. "I was wondering when you'd call." I told him everything, the calls, the legal letter, the silence that followed. He listened without interruption. Then he said, "You want to make changes to the estate?" "Yes, but I want to do it my way." He agreed to come by the next morning. When Harold arrived, the air was bright and cold. He looked older, but his eyes hadn't changed, kind and exact. We sat in the living room, sunlight falling across Eleanor's chair. I handed him a small folder. Inside were photographs, receipts, and a handwritten list. "These," I said, "belong to the house. They stay here." He nodded slowly. "And the rest? The rest goes to the people who actually remember who she was. The gardener who still brings flowers every spring. The librarian she used to bake for. The nurse who stayed after a shift just to sing." Harold smiled faintly. "You're cutting your children out." "I'm not cutting them out," I said. "I'm letting them find their own value system. They wanted numbers. I'm giving them none." He understood. We spent 3 hours drafting, revising, and sealing documents. When it was done, he slid the folder back into his case and said softly, "She'd be proud of you." After he left, I sat there for a long time. The snow outside had started to melt, dripping down the edges of the window. It felt like something inside me was thawing too. 2 weeks later, Marcus showed up. No call, no warning. He looked tired, not the kind of tired that comes from work, but the kind that comes from losing control of a story you thought you owned. "Dad," he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "We need to talk." I motioned him in. He sat down, glanced around the room, and sighed. "I don't know what to say. We got your message. Miranda's furious." I nodded. I expected that. He rubbed his temples. "You don't have to do this, you know. We can fix it. Just tell the lawyer to hold off." I poured 2 cups of coffee and handed him one. He didn't take it. "Marcus," I said, "do you remember the tree in the backyard? The one you and your sister used to climb?" He frowned, caught off guard. "The maple?" "Yeah. Do you remember what I told you the day you carved your initials into it?" He hesitated. "That the tree would remember?" "Yes," I said, and it did. Every scar on that bark tells a story of who we were. You wanted to cut it down last year because it blocked the light from the window. Do you remember what your mother said? He shook his head. She said, "You can't build new light by erasing old shade." He stared at me for a long time. Then, softer, almost childlike, he said, "I don't want to fight anymore, Dad." "Then don't," I said. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What did you do?" "I made sure the house stays where it belongs," I said, "and that what's left of your mother's work will go to people who understood her better than we did." He looked wounded. "That's cruel." "No," I said, "that's honest." We sat in silence. The clock ticked between us, counting out all the words we didn't say. Then, quietly, he said, "You really think she'd approve of this?" I turned my head toward Eleanor's chair. For a moment, I almost expected her to answer herself. "I think," I said, "she already did." He didn't reply. He just nodded slowly, stood, and walked to the door. Before leaving, he paused. "Miranda won't forgive you." "I know," I said, "but one day she'll understand." When the door closed, I felt something settle in my chest. Not victory, not relief, just peace. The kind of peace that doesn't need to be explained. That evening, I wrote one more letter, not to the lawyer, not to the children, but to Eleanor. I told her everything. About the confrontation, the snow, the silence. About how her words had guided every decision. Then I wrote, "You were right, my love. Love isn't about keeping. It's about remembering." I sealed the letter and placed it beneath her photograph on the mantel. Outside, the last of the snow gave way to thin green shoots of grass. The house no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like a promise kept. And as the light faded, I realized that sometimes justice doesn't need to make noise. It just needs to stand still long enough for others to see it. Spring came late that year. The trees outside the house were hesitant, as if testing whether it was safe to bloom again. I took it as a sign. Maybe grief, too, takes its time to trust the light. By then, Marcus had stopped calling. Miranda sent one last message, short, polite, and almost cold. "Hope you're doing okay. I need some space to process." I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to explain. Some lessons must unfold in silence. The days began to take on a rhythm again. I'd wake early, brew coffee, feed the birds near the porch, and read from Eleanor's old collection of poetry. I started repairing things around the house. The broken step, the squeaky hinge, the loose shutters. There was something healing about fixing small things when larger ones refused to mend. Every afternoon, I'd take a walk to the town square. People greeted me differently now, softer, more knowing. Word had spread, though I never told the story myself. Perhaps Harold had mentioned something, or maybe the small town simply pieced it together. In places like this, good secrets eventually leak through kindness. One afternoon, I passed the local library and saw a new plaque mounted beside the door. It read, "The Eleanor Benedict Reading Corner, established through the quiet generosity of a lifelong friend of words." I stood there for a long moment, tracing the letters with my eyes. I hadn't arranged it. Harold must have followed through with her old wish. And just like that, she had found another way to keep teaching, even from beyond. I went inside. The librarian, an older woman named Ruth, recognized me instantly. "She made all this possible," she said, smiling faintly. "Every book here, all of it came from a donation in her name." I didn't tell her that the donation had also come from her hidden accounts, the ones I'd guarded for a year, just as she'd asked. I simply nodded. "That sounds like her." Ruth added quietly, "Your wife changed more lives than she ever let anyone see." I left the library lighter than I'd entered. A few weeks later, on an ordinary Tuesday, I received a letter. It was from Marcus. The handwriting was shaky, the tone stripped of arrogance. "Dad, I've been thinking about what you said. About the tree. About Mom. I realized I've been chasing a version of success that doesn't remember where it started. I want to tell you I'm sorry, not just for what we did, but for how we stopped seeing you as a person. Miranda won't say it yet, but she feels the same. We're both trying to do better. I hope it's not too late." I read it twice before folding it carefully and placing it beside Eleanor's photograph. Then I whispered, "See, they're finding their way back." That night, I dreamed of her again, not in sadness, but in motion. She was in the garden, wearing her blue sun hat, humming some tune without words. She turned toward me, smiled, and said, "You see, Harold, they're learning. Slowly, but learning." When I woke, I was crying, but the tears didn't hurt. They felt earned. That summer, I began opening the house again. Not for sale, but for life. I invited the neighborhood children to use the yard for their weekend games. I hosted small gatherings for the seniors who lived alone. We'd sit on the porch, share coffee, and talk about nothing in particular. One afternoon, Ruth from the library came by with a young volunteer. They asked if I'd like to donate a few of Eleanor's books to their summer reading project. I said yes, and later realized it was the first time I'd let anything of hers leave the house willingly. The next day, when they came to collect the books, I noticed the maple tree outside, the one with the carved initials. A pair of sparrows had built a nest in its lower branches. I smiled. That tree had survived storms, pruning, and almost being cut down. It had scars, yes, but it had also learned how to hold life again. It occurred to me, then, maybe that's what love really is, not protection from pain, but the courage to grow around it. A year after Eleanor's passing, Harold the lawyer returned for one final visit. We sat in the living room again, same spot as before. He handed me a small envelope. "This," he said, "closes everything officially. The accounts, the documents, the trust. It's all done." I nodded. "Thank you, Harold, for helping me keep her wish." He smiled. "You kept more than that, my friend. You kept her spirit intact." After he left, I walked out to the porch. The evening light had turned golden, dust motes dancing like tiny suns in the air. I sat there until the first fireflies appeared. And in that stillness, I realized the story had come full circle. What began as loss had turned into lesson, not just for my children, but for me. Grief, I understood now, isn't a wound that needs closing. It's a window. Through it, you see what remains after the noise fades. Eleanor's letter had ended with a line I hadn't noticed before. It was written faintly at the bottom, almost invisible in the folds. "When you feel lost, remember, our love was never meant to be spent, only shared." I read it aloud, softly, the words trembling through the quiet. Then I looked out at the maple tree and whispered, "I'm still sharing my love." In the end, nothing spectacular happened. No dramatic reconciliations, no public apologies, no headlines. Just a man, a house, a memory, and a peace he hadn't known he was searching for. But that's the thing about real stories. They don't end with noise. They end when the heart finally exhales. And mine, after all this time, finally did.